I'm going to talk to you about how we approach document security optimization from the office automation industry, because that's our traditional approach to it, and that's where we come from. So, why focus on security? Well, security is particularly important because of a number of key IT trends. It's been driven by the fact that you've got compliance, but it's also been driven by the fact that if you look at the way industry is going these days, and you've already heard it mentioned a couple of times today, is that you're seeing an awful lot more of these kinds of devices appearing in your working lives. And 4 years ago, this was only talked about. Now you've got, I think we're going to the iPad 3, or we've just gone to the iPad 3. We're about to get the Windows Stream. We've got Android versions from Samsung. You name it, everybody's making these things. The majority of people have got mobile phones, both corporately and privately, and all of these things are having a huge impact on the way we work in our daily lives. And one of the trends that's coming up, and what you're hear an awful lot about, and which is really taking an impact in the IT departments of organizations, both large and small, is the bring your own device strategy, or bring your own device trend, because it is really impacting organizations, particularly in the areas of security, because users are finding way around security protocols to use their own personal devices because it suits them better. Other expectations because of that then is the investment towards security in the office automation industry in 2013. So if you look at this, these are just two different sources. It gives you an idea of what kind of investment we can expect. It's really become an agenda point for CIOs, CFOs, and CEOs of organizations, because they're having to invest more and more in it, because there's more and more documentation and paper flying around an organization and being used on a daily basis. I heard a recent statistic last week that the majority of the information you can find on the internet these days was created in the last 2 years, and it's about 90% of that information that's out there came about in the last 2 years, which is a phenomenal amount of information when you think about it, considering the internet now has been going for around 10, maybe 15 years. So compliance, you've heard an awful lot of about compliance today from different sources. But even in our industry, from the office automation side of it, there are a number of things that we have to work with, and our customers have to work with, and our partners have to work with regards to handling industry. And those different compliance regulations, they come across on different levels. In order to work in the public sector in particular, and especially with military organizations and security organizations, we have to be able to demonstrate that the equipment that we have, not only the processes and the solutions that we offer, but also the hardware equipment, because we are a hardware equipment manufacturer and vendor and reseller of a total solution that involves hardware equipment, that it is compliant to certain standards with regards to security. So we have to meet all of these. And then we also have the national and international legislation. So the Sarbanes-Oxley is a well-known one, but in Ireland, for example, we have to meet the rules and regulations set by the Irish Data Protection Commissioner. Just like in the UK, we have to meet the same regulations set by the Data Protection Act. And in Holland, we have to meet, and in Germany. So it's all these European rules, American rules, Asian rules, global rules, standard rules. So we have to meet all of those all of the time. And those also dictate the governance that we as an organization have to be able to provide to our partners and our customers, to give assurances that any data that we manage on their behalf, any data that goes through our equipment at their sites, in their offices, that it's going to be protected. But it also affects the decision-making process of those customers and users, because of what they want to do with the equipment. Increasing amount of data is going through it, because it's no longer just a photocopier. It's now a mainframe computer that handles print jobs. And that's how much the industry has moved in the last 15 years. When I left university 15 years ago and came into this industry, we still had separate photocopiers, faxes, and printers, and never the twain would they speak to each other. Now we have a device that does all of that, and it's also running a Java application, and it can communicate with an iPad, and it can communicate with the cloud, and it can bring information down, and it can print directly out of the internet without any intervention of a PC, as long as it's got an internet connection straight out. That's how far we moved on in the office automation industry world with the equipment. It's not just computers and handheld devices that are now connected. Your copier could be connected potentially, and you might not even know it. And that is also a huge risk. And it brings me onto the main part of my presentation, which is concerning risk. And it's about the risk of the data information that you have surrounding your organization and the documentation, what you have in it. So if we just look at a few examples here, there are many examples of what the risks can be, and they cover all different areas. And I've picked a couple, three here, the two from the BBC, but the one that's most interesting I've noticed this morning, because I've heard it come up a couple of times, is this one here. Now, you'll notice this one's in Dutch, and I've put it up there for a reason, and it's mainly to show one thing, and it comes up on the next slide, is Talent Hospital admits data breach of patient records. That one back there is a Dutch hospital, and they're admitting more or less the same things. The problem's not unique to one particular country or one particular country. It's the same problem no matter what country you're in. This is exactly the same story in two countries involving two hospitals, leakage of data protection information. But you've also got other things. An important one, firms complacent about e-security. But when they say e-security, most people think of network protection and making sure passwords are safe and firewalls are implemented. But the last thing they always forget is the photocopier. How many of you here have got potentially photocopiers in your organization, and how many of you are actually sure that the data on those devices, because the majority of them these days are all fitted with hard drives, is actually secure? Can anyone put their hand up honestly, hand on heart, and say that? And those are the issues that how we approach the story of security and document security optimization. Because the consequences are, you could be losing intellectual property rights, you could be losing customer information, it could be leaking, not through the device as it's in your organization, but simply because someone can use the device to copy the information. They can use the device to scan to email that information. That information, every time you make a photocopy or a print or a scan, there's a latent image of that information stored in the device. Now, there are ways around to get around this, and I'll come on to them. But there's the potential there that if you don't realize what can happen, then you've got no policies and procedures in place to protect it. And that's one of the things we're here to discuss today. Because the result of that loss of information could be this consequence. And this was an interesting statistic I found, and if anyone's interested in looking at the source, it's actually there. But it says when something goes wrong about the breach of information from a victim, they tell 8 people. Those 8 people have 2,000 people in their circle of influence, which potentially could mean for you as your organization, because it is effectively about your brand, 40 lost customers. And it starts to double up. And it's a very important thing to remember, that when you're talking about risk and information in your organization, you're also talking about your brand. Because I approach this, I'm a marketing guy, I approach everything from the perspective of, how is this going to look? So if we lose this information, how is this going to look? If we do this, how will this be perceived in the world outside? What will it do to the brand image? And if you bring it down to a personal level, it's what everyone does every morning. When you put on a suit, how does this look? How will I be perceived? How do I carry myself? How am I perceived? How I handle myself, how am I perceived? And it's the same with your organization and with your information, how you handle people's information. And Catherine mentioned earlier on, it's about the ethics of what you do with it, not only the procedures and the governance, it's about the ethics around it as well, how you handle it and demonstrate how you handle it. So that's risk. And there are risks around office automation equipment that a lot of people realize now. It's becoming more and more apparent. It's becoming more and more known, but an awful lot of people still don't realize that there is an element of risk there that can be very easily addressed and very easily solved. And within Ricoh, we have something called document security optimization. I alluded to it at the start. And we actually have a formula for it. We call our DSO formula. And I'll break it down because it's basically R equals A by T by V. And it basically means this. The R is the risk, and that's the intersection of your assets, threats and vulnerabilities. So that's the actual where they all meet together. Then you've got the asset, which is what you're actually trying to protect. Now that could be your information, it could be printed documents, it could be, if you're a technology company, it could be patented information. If you're a sales organization, it could be your customer database. If you're a public sector body like a hospital, for example, it's patient records. And in all of those kinds of organizations, there'll always be procedures and policies in place to protect it until somebody wants to print it or make a copy of it or make a scan of it for whatever reason. And that's the possibility where it could fall down. The threat, what are you trying to protect against? Are you trying to protect against someone coming in, or are you just trying to protect against accidental leakage? In the cases that we often see involving office equipment, it's accidental leakage. It's not a nefarious act of somebody deliberately trying to use that as the weak point, although we often get asked the question. But it's pure accidental leakage. So it comes down to human error. And the human being is possibly the biggest culprit when it comes to data leakage that ever came across the industry. And the vulnerability, the weakness or gap in your protection effort, and that's knowledge. So do people know that if they do A, B will be a consequence? And if they, how do you stop B from being a consequence and ensure that A doesn't necessarily have to be done in such a way that it leads to a consequence? And that's where we try to add the value by closing those gaps and plugging those leak holes. So if I just show you this, I mean, you've heard about software, you've heard about electronic data management, you've heard about the compliance element. The way where we approach it from, as I said, is that we look at the particular area that surrounds the hard copy device, so the devices that are used, because of course we are a device manufacturer, and that's where we will start our position from. Because when we put in any solution, it will automatically always involve an MFD, a multifunctional device, and it will have various kinds of software attached to it in order to provide a complete solution. So because we do it from a customer-centric perspective, we're always looking first from the consultative area in order to see how we actually make that approach. What is the customer need? What do they want to achieve? And how are we going to work together to achieve it? So the way we work is on a consultancy basis, providing the implementation and training, and that's where you come into the change management area. So it's not only about putting the solution in, and you just heard it was referred to as an agile way of doing it. We heard also we had the idea of it being buy-in or investment, but we call it implementation and training. When we put it in, we actually work with the people who have to use the equipment on a daily basis to ensure that they know, well, the reason your organization is changing the way it works is because it wants to prevent this. That means from now on, you should work this way with the device, and this is the benefit as to why you would do it, and this is what it protects, and this is what it stops, and this is how it makes it more productive. And then at the end, of course, we've got the sanitization of a device when it comes back, which is one of the key areas that people tend to forget. So if I just sum that up, it's partially the technology that you have in there. So the technology is there and it's capable of keeping the information secure and safe. It's capable of ensuring that documents that are put through it can be hidden or rewritten so that they can't be read out and be used for nefarious ends. It's implementing the right solution that only gives the required access to each user that they need to have access to the device for so that they can put the information through it. The mind shift changing, so ensuring the staff are aware and confident in using the technology in the correct manner, in the correct way. But the last one is the device sanitization. So when a device comes back, because the majority of you will probably have equipment from whoever's supplying it to you on a leasing agreement, and at the end of that leasing agreement it goes back, and this is where you get the hole in the scenario. Is it goes back, it's got a hard drive in it. Anyone with the right software potentially can just pull out that hard drive, plug into a laptop with the right software, and they can read out every single document that ever went through that device. And it's about ensuring and offering that particular service is one of our strengths, because being a manufacturer, we have the ability to do that, to be able to take it completely back and make it completely clean, sanitizing the device. And these are all different things that we wrap up in our total DSO solution. So that's the total element of it. So that's essentially what I wanted to get across to you. Is, you know, there are more than there's more than one element. It's also, let's not forget the hard copy equipment that you're using, because that is often, together with the user, one of the weak points in there. Thank you for your time.